All right, everybody, welcome to the Gildre Spotlight podcast. Today we have an exciting guest. His name is Logan Burchett. He is calling out of Louisville, Kentucky. He is the current founder and CEO of Forecastr, one of the biggest financial predicting fintech companies in the world. But Logan, if you can give a quick background of who you are to our audience, that'd be fantastic.
Awesome. Happy to. Thanks for having me, Taiga. I really appreciate it and excited to be here. So, a little bit about me. I am an entrepreneur based out of Louisville, Kentucky. And I was actually born in Lexington, Kentucky. And so it's kind of interesting being kind of like in Kentucky, kind of like a southern, maybe Midwestern state. You don't really associate these areas with startups and venture capital and entrepreneurship. It's kind of like a foreign world, where I'm from. And so I kind of stumbled into the founder life. So a little bit about me. I'm kind of a finance nerd through and through. I graduated college with a degree in economics. I went in to go and get my MBA in finance. And really what I wanted to do with my life was go into what I call big finance. So kind of the investment banking, Wall Street, major asset management, kind of what you think about like when you think of like Gordon Gekko or like those types of people. That's what I wanted. I didn't exactly know what that meant, but I knew that I wanted to do something kind of big in the realm of finance. And of course, whenever I was younger, I didn't really know a lot about startups or venture capital or anything like that. But I just wanted to kind of wrap my arms around this world of finance and just kind of like see what was out there for me. So after I graduated with my MBA, which I got in at Xavier up in Cincinnati, I was really just trying to like break into something that was kind of like large scale, more like institutional finance and really kind of geared towards asset management. And so I ended up getting a job at the only place in Kentucky that has like a big pool of money that you can manage, which is the Kentucky Pension Fund. And so I helped manage their stock portfolio for a number of years. I managed about 53% of their portfolio. It was really cool, because you get to meet a lot of really important people when you control that amount of money. I mean, their pension fund was like, at the time, I think $18 billion of assets under management. And so whenever you're managing like roughly half that, then you can pretty much get a meeting with anybody on Wall Street because they're just looking to get a piece of that. And, so it was really cool. Got to meet a lot of really interesting people, learned a lot about just kind of asset management. But the biggest thing that I learned was something that was about myself, which is that I didn't really love the work that I was doing. I mean, essentially what I was doing at that time was trying to find the best and the brightest of stock pickers, people that could actually manage a portfolio. But I was actually sitting next to this guy named Anthony Chu, who managed the pension fund's private equity portfolio, which included their venture capital portfolio. And so they have obviously like kind of a robust multi-billion-dollar private equity portfolio. And I would just like hear the type of work that this guy did and listen into his calls and just kind of get an understanding of his world. And it was just way more interesting than the stuff that I was doing. I found his world so much more interesting than my world. So kind of the private, kind of like earlier stage venture capital type of work, that to me was the interesting stuff, the cool stuff. And it was kind of a similar thing where I knew that I was interested in kind of the embryonic stages of business, but I didn't quite know what to do with that energy. So I decided at that point I wasn't going to be able to get the exposure that I wanted at the pension fund. I really wanted to be kind of like boots on the ground, something like really helping build and scale an earlier stage company. So that's whenever I got introduced to a guy named John Shoemate, who is the CEO of a company called Venture First, which at the time was a 409A valuation shop that was kind of morphing into a fractional CFO services firm. And at the time, they only had, I think it was 4 full-time employees. So I was number 5 into that company. And they hired me to help all of their clients, like with fractional CFO services, with financial leadership, with forecasting, like all of the things that go into the early stages of business finance. That was kind of my job. and they were super early and I was super young and didn't quite know what I was doing yet. But it was just like a firm with a lot of energy and then a person, so me with a lot of energy, kind of coming together and saying, we'll figure this out. And like, we don't quite know what it looks like, but we're gonna kind of like build this thing up and figure it out. And so that's really where I say I cut my teeth and learned everything that I know now about venture capital, about early stage finance, about what it means to be a fractional CFO, about what success in finance looks like in various stages of business. And I did that for I think 3 or 4 years. I started as a kind of a lower level, like junior financial analyst. By the time I left, I was kind of managing a team of analysts and had built up a book of business. And the company had grown from 5 employees up to 30 by the time that I left. So it was like really cool to be able to see like the growth in the company, but then also just learn everything that I can or everything that I did while I was with them. And it was actually working at that company that led me to starting Forecastr, because while that company was doing some cutting edge stuff and really helping a lot of super ambitious founders with finance, everything that they did was still out of Excel, because that's how finance is predominantly run even today. Is you would build a financial model, you would manage metrics, all of that, the communication would all be done through either Excel or Google Sheets. And I kind of took notice of this, and my now co-founder Steven was working at this firm as well, and we both kind of like had this conversation around noticing that every other business function that these companies had a corresponding integrated online web app to help support it. And if you really think about it, it makes sense, right? You've got for your CRM, you've got HubSpot, Salesforce, things like that. For your accounting, you have QuickBooks and Xero. For your cap table, you have you could go down the list of a business function and you can kind of draw a line to a corresponding software. But then we got to FP&A, financial planning and analysis. It's a major business function. I mean, this is a cornerstone function for pretty much every, middle market business, and going down into the early market, it's still something that a lot of companies pay attention to. But there was no corresponding software to help with that, right? There was everything was still done in Excel, still done in Google Sheets. And so we decided to go on some customer discovery tours and try to learn a little bit more about that and why that was. And, through having a lot of conversations, we couldn't find a compelling reason why this had to be in Excel, why financial modeling, forecasting, FP&A had to be in Excel. It's just one of those things that finance people don't tend to start businesses. And so while everything else was going off and innovating, finance was still kind of like stuck in this corner because it wasn't being pushed by a lot of innovators simply because of the nature of the function. And so we saw that, we noticed that there was a massive opportunity there. And so we decided to chase it down. So me and Steven kind of teamed up as co-founders, and, we decided that this was a business that we really wanted to build. And kind of the rest is history, they say. Like, we've raised 15 million in funding thus far. We have over 40 full-time employees. We're over 3 million in annual revenue. So it's been great. It's been a lot of fun. It's had a lot of ups and downs and challenges and successes, but I wouldn't trade it for the world.
That's amazing. And I want to take a step back because it's so unique that your company's based in the Midwest. I know that you split kind of part of your time in Cincinnati, Louisville, places that I'm fairly unfamiliar. I'm a West Coast, I'm from Montana originally. I'm a West Coast person. I went to college in Southern California, started my career in Seattle. There's a lot of tech entrepreneurship, innovation happening. What kind of led you to I know that you wanted to get into finance when you're younger, but what was kind of like do you have any influences or mentors or anyone that you looked up to that you kind of wanted to emulate starting in tech and kind of, starting your career in tech and finance? I feel like those are very, one's very archaic, one's very futuristic, kind of molding the two together. Who were kind of your influences growing up?
Yeah, no, I really appreciate the question. And I would say for me, it was kind of different people influenced me in different ways. And I would say that there wasn't anybody that is like broadly familiar to your audience that I can point to say, hey, it was Steve Jobs, or hey, it was like this major founder that really influenced me. It was a lot of people that were in my network and people that I knew. So I'll give you some examples. So I would say the first influence for me to start making my way into venture capital was Anthony Chu, who is of the private equity portfolio for the pension fund. Just because I was so interested in his work, and he was such an interesting and smart guy, that it caused me to want to kind of look into this thing, venture capital, a little bit deeper. So like that was like my primary influence for starting my journey. But then I got introduced to John Shoemate, who was a founder in and of his own right. He started Venture First. He was the founder CEO of the company. And it was mainly an advisory firm, mainly a services firm doing valuations and doing, they did more complex valuations as well, but then they did fractional CFO services. That was the first time that I was like, really got a lot of exposure to somebody that was actively doing it, actively building a company, generating a lot of revenue, generating some cash, that type of thing. And so I got a lot of inspiration from him and just like noticing how he thought, noticing how he directed his team and things like that. But he was still predominantly growing a services firm. It was a successful services firm, but it was a services firm nonetheless. It was another guy that really inspired me to take a harder look at SaaS and technology. And that was a guy named Steve Huey, who was on the board of Venture First. He was a client of Venture First. He's kind of known in our local ecosystem here in Louisville as being like a very successful kind of like tech advisor, somebody that helps a lot of startups. He invests a bit as well. He's got a private equity company that he runs now. But it was kind of like this combination of Anthony that got me looking into venture capital, John, who kind of like showed me how to build a business and kind of inspired that fire within me to want to do the same thing. But then Steve Huey for like guiding me towards SaaS and like showing me that, if you apply technology in a very specific way, even to services businesses, then it's just going to enhance the multiple that you get significantly. And that's kind of like his approach to building businesses is find something that's kind of more services focused and then injecting SaaS into it and really supercharging the margins and scaling, efficiencies and things like that. So it's kind of like a combination of those three people, but they were all people that I knew that I could meet with, that I could ask questions to and have a dialogue with, and not so much people that I saw online or read about or things like that.
When, before starting Forecastr, because I know going from I know you're working kind of in venture capital, but I know like in finance, but escaping kind of the 9 to 5 stable career, having an income, having just that stability and jumping into entrepreneurship, very high risk. What were kind of your thoughts and feelings before leaving your corporate 9 to 5 job, jumping into becoming an entrepreneur? And were you confident that Forecastr was going to be, the way it is today?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say for me, whenever I originally made that jump, I mean, like I said, I was at the pension fund. So I did that's about as stable of a job as you can get, by the way. It's, government work, state government work. It's basically, impossible to get fired by a government job here in Kentucky. And so I was more or less guaranteed a paycheck with a pension if I just stuck around and kind of like did this for the long haul. But at the same time, whenever I left the pension fund, I was probably 25 years old, right? So I had this mindset of if you're not going to take a chance now, when are you going to take a chance? Like you might as well jump in and do something that you really want to do, because at 25 years old, I could face plan, I could run out of money, I could move back with my parents, like that type of thing. That was kind of the mentality I was in, was like, why not just fail? You know what I mean? Like, why not just like take a chance? And if I fail, I've still got enough years in front of me to make it up 5 times if I need to, So that was kind of the mindset that I was in. So it was mainly like a fork in the road type of situation for me, for 25-year-old Logan. It was like, do I want to just keep doubling down at this 9 to 5 and do government work until I retire? And that would be a nice life, although it'd be kind of probably a boring life, at least for a guy like me. Or do I want to really take a swing and like do something big and just try to figure out what I'm made of? And it was a pretty easy decision, was like, okay, let's just jump in and see what's over here and take a chance on myself. And even knowing there's risks and things like that, it was just kind of this like, I'm not afraid to fail, type of thing, like, especially in my earlier years. And I would say what got me hooked on it was the first time that I actually worked with a startup founder and helped them understand what their cash flow was looking like, help them set goals, help them build a forecast, help them get visibility and confidence in their business, which is ultimately what a CFO does. Whenever I still remember the first client that I worked with, it was a company called Ready App based here in Louisville. They're still around, they're doing really well. But I remember building their financial model, sitting down with the founder and CEO of this company, and it was like a 30 employee company. So to me, that was big. Just like I just remember like doing something, showing it to the CEO, and they were like, this is going to help me run my business better because now I know who I can afford to hire. I know where my cash is going. I know, I have clarity on whether or not I need to raise money. And so just seeing the real world tangible impact, that you're having immediately was just addicting to me because working at the pension fund or even, I was a financial analyst at a big company before that as kind of like an internship. Like I couldn't tell you what I was actually doing to contribute to the company. Like my work just got lost in the mess. Like it wasn't important. And I felt like I could go away tomorrow and nobody would even notice, let alone care. They wouldn't even notice that my work was missing because it was just getting thrown into this big blob of like nothingness basically whenever I was in corporate. And whenever you're in a startup, you can't get away from your impact. You know what I mean? It's so obvious and it's so inherent. And if you go away, you better believe like 10 different people are going to notice that you're gone and probably be hitting you up and calling you and just like needing you. And I feel like it's that just kind of like, being able to tangibly see and notice the impact that you have on people and on the market, on the company. That's what keeps me going every single day. That's the thing that really drives me.
No, I think it's no better feeling knowing that you're actually making a positive difference in the world, not just being another cog in the machine. It's almost a disservice to a lot of people knowing that if they leave the job the next day, no one's going to notice. It's almost like, am I that important in this position? But going back to Forecastr, was there no other type of financial modeling SaaS product out there? Or just finance as far as just having, like most CFOs were just using spreadsheets and have their own financial models internally. There was no other type of just SaaS solution because you started Forecastr back in 2019, 2018.
It's debatable when we started it. So we had the idea for the company back in 2018. I think it was like August of 2018. And then we basically did customer discovery up until Jan 1 of 2020, which is when the company officially got incorporated. So according to the state, the company started as as a C Corp basically in January of 2020, January 1 of 2020. We had an LLC before then, but you can kind of pick and choose when you want to say your start date was. But I would say like to directly answer your question, like were there tools out there that were solving this problem? Kind of, right? And this is one of the things that I think is really interesting as kind of something that I had to go through when starting Forecastr was if you look online back in 2018. There was a company called Get Poindexter. There was a company called, I think it was just called financialmodel.io or .com or something like that. And then there was another company called Hive Metrics. Those are basically the three that we can find. None of them were generating significant revenue. None of them were getting any significant market penetration. Basically, none of them seemed as though they were very successful. And so the natural question I had is like, if these people are trying to do this and they're, at least from an outside looking in, seeing basically little to no success, then why do I think that I could do any better than them? Or basically, maybe another way of saying it is like somebody's already tried this and the market didn't like it. So like that gave me a little bit of hesitation for jumping in. But at the end of the day, I think there's this quote that I really like. I'm probably going to butcher it, but it's your idea is worthless and execution is everything. So people that are like, hey, I need you to sign my NDA so that you don't steal my idea, that type of thing. I feel like they kind of like miss the mark where it's like, it really just all comes down to proper execution. And just because somebody has tried your idea and it didn't work out doesn't mean that you have a bad idea, right? It just means that it wasn't executed properly. So whenever you take a look at these products that were, in the 2010s, they were super rigid. They weren't powerful at all. They weren't the way that we would have built the app. And they weren't, to my knowledge, built by people that were experts in finance like we were. And so we decided we weren't going to let that detract us. We still thought that it was a massive opportunity. All of our customer discovery led us to starting the company because everybody loved the idea and loved the vision that we were kind of building towards. So, the lessons that I learned there are that just because a company has been tried and failed, it doesn't mean that it's a bad idea. It could just mean bad execution. And at the end of the day, listen to the people that will write you a check, right? Listen to your customers. That's the most important thing, because if our customers had told us, no, we would not buy this, or no, we're not interested in this, we wouldn't have started the company. It would have died right there. We would have just said, there's not an opportunity here. But the fact that people were not only, they weren't just saying that they were interested in the idea of Forecastr, they were leaning in and like asking us, please let me know when this is available. Please let me know when this is ready. Can I pay you now, type of thing, to like help, alleviate, like the pain was so obvious and so severe that we almost kind of got pulled into starting Forecastr, despite having other companies that had failed in the past.
That must be an amazing feeling, knowing that before the product's even built, that knowing, you already have potentially customers that could be utilizing your product. And so a lot of our listeners are startup founders. A lot of them are fairly early stage startup founders. Being a startup founder, you wear many different hats. Your day is filled with so many different things. Typically, how do you prioritize your day, and how can you be as effective and efficient as possible with so many different hats to wear?
Yeah, really appreciate the question. I'll say, first and foremost, my role and the role of any founder changes significantly over time, right? So whenever we were just generating our first dollars of revenue, we had just raised a couple $100,000 of funding. It's like you're the chief everything officer, right? You do literally everything because there's nobody else to help you. You have to, every bit of mail that's delivered into your office, every person that you hire, everything you have to have direct ownership of. And I was actually thinking about this the other day. As the business has grown, I have basically had a role of everybody at the business at one point in time or another, if that makes sense. So we have like over 40 people now. We have financial analysts, we have product people, we have engineers, we have like, the whole gambit of people. I was kind of like thinking to myself, like, I have been the head of product. I have been somebody that took on CFO clients. I've been an analyst. I've been a salesperson. I've led the sales team. I've done, all of those things at one point or another. And as we grow and get more successful, we hire people to have those functions, to take those functions away from us, essentially. Dan Martell, if you're familiar with him, he's kind of a big influencer in the space. He calls it buying back your time. And he has a whole book called Buy Back Your Time. And that's an interesting way to think about it, where in the early stages, you're just doing it as the founder, and it being anything, the job at hand, right? Whatever that means. You're doing it because nobody else can do it. But as you get more funds and as you get more success, now you can afford to offload things onto other people. And the cool thing is, the people that we hired, especially because we're venture backed, so we can afford, really top tier people, they're all better at their respective functions than I am, right? So like, I'm not the greatest financial analyst of all time, but we can hire great financial analysts. I'm not, the greatest head of product at all time, not by any stretch. So we can hire great product people now. And we can just kind of like level ourselves up by just getting really base people kind of like underneath us. And that's really, there's another phrase that Dan uses. He says, don't build the business, build the people, and the people will build the business. And that's kind of how I think about it. It's just kind of like getting everybody at the right seats on the bus, and then just kind of like overseeing all of that. And I would say to kind of prioritize today, Forecastr today, 15 million in funding, 40 plus employees, kind of like where do I spend my time? Well, a lot of it is just aligning people on what is most important right now, because at the end of the day, you just need to point everybody in the right direction and make sure you have the right people on your team and that they're playing well together. And they will make sure that your goals happen, right? If they're properly spec'd and all of that, they're the ones that are actually going to to make sure that the business is achieving what it needs to achieve. So it's really my job and the rest of the executive team's job just to make sure that we're all rolling in the same direction. And I'll say this, this is kind of an interesting anecdote that I think it's helpful whenever I think of businesses and the importance of people. There's an economist named Milton Friedman, one of the most famous economists of all time. And he has this famous video. It's on YouTube. You can look it up. It's really interesting. And he explains this way better than I can. But he holds up a pencil, right? Just a straight, normal pencil. And he says, it is impossible for any one person in the world to make this pencil, right? It's impossible for any one person to make the pencil. And then he goes into what he means by that. He says, well, to get the wood for the pencil, you have to grow the tree over many years. You have to then chop down the tree. You have to process the wood. You then have to get the wood in some way to kind of like adhesived together, if that's even a word, into that perfect shape. And then you have to get the lead and you have to process the lead in the mines from, to get that in, and then the eraser. And you have to, so basically he just like goes in step by step for all of the things that need to happen, everything that needs to be coordinated to just build something very simple like a pencil. And the point that he was trying to make is the power of markets, efficiency of markets and the free markets and things like that, which that's a big, point as well. But the thing that I really take away from is like, it just takes everybody working together, and like together you can achieve things that seem impossible, than, compared to what you can do on your own. So when you kind of see business through that lens, you stop trying to do everything yourself, because you're like, if I do everything myself, I can't even make a pencil by myself, right? Like I'm not going to make it very far if I'm on my own, or if I'm trying to do everything on my own. The only way I'll succeed is by getting everybody, my team together, rowing in the same direction. And that's what'll lead to success.
I love that anecdote. I love that story from that economist. Going back to when you got your first tranche of funding, I think a lot of founders get some sort of funding, they hire too fast, they don't strategically grow, and then they crumble. How are you able to, implement your capital strategically, hire the right people without crumbling too fast?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I will say, first and foremost, this is kind of a plug for Forecastr, but it's true. It's just good forecasting and good cash flow management is one of the big things that I attribute to our success. I've worked with a lot of companies over the years as a fractional CFO, and I've seen people get some funding, get really excited, juice up their burn significantly to a number that is kind of untenable. And then they kind of take their eyes off of the horizon. And then by the time they notice that they're in a cash crunch, it's already too late. And so for us, we know pretty much, with a very high degree of certainty, because of like our expertise in the business that we built, if we raise $10 million, we know how long that's going to buy us. And we're going to look at that number every single month. So as soon as, we dip below 6 months of runway, or like once we start flirting with that, we know, hey, we really have to pay attention to raising money, or we need to make adjustments, and we just have to, we can't let that slide, and we have to be very, very proactive about managing the money that we've raised. So I would say from a burn rate perspective, that's one of the things that has led to our success, or at least led us to avoiding failure, is just being very diligent about the money that we've raised and making sure that we're not overspending. But then to answer kind of the second portion of your question, which is like, how do you make sure that you're getting the right people and make sure that, you're spending money in the right ways? It comes down to really two things, I would say. One is like when it comes to figuring out who you should hire, I think it kind of changes over time. Whenever you're early, I think that it is that buying back your time mindset. It is like, what am I doing to drive the business forward? And how do I get somebody to take this over from me so that I can focus on the next thing, right? And so it's like you basically replacing yourself over time. So it becomes relatively obvious the types of things that you should hire for. Early on in Forecastr, I spent all of my days on the phone talking to customers trying to get deals. So it's like, hey, we need an AE to take that over. We need somebody that can like do that, because it's not strategic for me to try to close as many deals as I possibly can. Okay, so you get that problem solved. And now I'm working with a bunch of clients, getting them onboarded into the software and making sure that they're successful. Well, okay, so now I got to replace that. And so now you've kind of got this like jumbled, you have to kind of go back and forth and just kind of like see where you're needed and then try to hire yourself away from that function. So that's how it is whenever you're early. But then once you get all of the bases kind of covered and you've kind of like hired yourself away from all of the core parts of the business, then it becomes listening to your team, right? Because now you've got kind of a management layer that sits underneath you. And so you're removed from the business, right? So you're kind of removed from the day-to-day operations, but because you have great people and you have a team, you just have to listen to what they have to say, and you have to kind of point them towards a goal of like, hey, this is what we're trying to achieve. What do you need in order to get me there, right? In order to get the business to here, what do you need? And it could be we're good with the team we have. We can get there with the team that we have. It could be to get there, we're going to have to hire 5 more AEs and 3 more analysts or whatever it is. But it's like you have to kind of like get everybody rowing in the same direction and then make sure that they have the resources they need to actually get there. So that's kind of how you figure out who to hire. And the last thing I'll say on that is like always prioritize culture, always prioritize your people. Your people are the most important thing in business. And bad culture is one of, I think, the most underrated startup killers is people just teams not jiving well together because of 1 or 2 bad actors. They can just drag the entire company down. Right. So you have to be ruthless about who you let in. You have to make sure that the culture is maintained and that everybody is like, jiving well together, because as soon as that ecosystem is disrupted, your company's at significant risk, because you can't achieve anything on your own. As we've already said, it only works whenever you're working together.
Makes sense. I couldn't agree more with that. The people that you hire, the company culture is one of the most important aspects in a successful business. I'd like to understand a little bit too, just right now you have 40 employees. You've grown quite fast in the past 5 years. It's quite amazing. How do you structure your meetings? Like your weekly meetings, your daily meetings? What's like kind of the cadence for your all hand meetings? Like how do you optimally structure kind of just meetings in general for your company and communication?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I would say we kind of like rely a lot on our management layer at this point in the business. And it's something that I think a lot of founders kind of struggle with or have to learn. At least I struggled with it. And it's something that I really had to learn, going from being an individual contributor, somebody that was responsible for getting all the work done, to hiring people to get the work done, right? Because what a lot of people do is they kind of default into execution mode. So like whenever a hard problem arises, they jump down and they solve the problem. But if you do that, what you're really doing is you're undercutting your managers, which is not something that's good, not something that's scalable. And so you have to kind of work everything through the managers. So our meeting structures are really built with that in mind. I would say every week we have an executive management meeting where it's just the executives. It's myself and my co-founder, our chief of staff, and our chief technology officer. We get together and we kind of just talk about, whatever it is that we need to talk about at that point in time. We have that weekly. And then every 2 weeks, we have me and my co-founder have meetings with the managers of all of our respective departments. So we have a customer success manager meeting, we have a marketing manager meeting, partnerships, onboarding, product, like all of those things. We meet with the managers of each of those individual departments, right? And so what we've done, because we're a very metrics driven company, is each manager has their set of metrics that they manage to. And we start the meeting by reviewing those metrics just to understand, is there anything weird in the numbers that we need to talk about? Or is everything good? So we start doing that, and then we kind of move into their priorities for the next 2 weeks, or what it is that they're focused on and things like that. We don't actually direct in any way any of the individual contributors anymore, because if we did, then we'd be undercutting our managers. So we kind of work everything through the manager layer. And that's really important, I think, at this point in the company, once you get to about 40 employees. So we do those with the managers. You asked about kind of like company-wide or all hands and things like that. I would say we do a company all hands meeting once a month where we get the entire company together. And the agenda for that meeting, it really kind of depends on what's going on. But the one thing that is important always in that meeting is just company alignment on what's most important right now. So we try to align everybody around the North Star, what we're focused on. We give any kind of company-wide updates that we need to as well. So we'll do that. And because we're a remote company, and because we're a startup, and because one of our core values is to have fun, we do try to like prioritize that as well. So we'll do a monthly team gathering meeting where it's no work, it's just fun. We'll do team trivia, or we'll do a show and tell, or we'll do something, we'll play games or something like that. We try to do that once a month. And then we do just kind of, we encourage all of our employees to have one-on-ones with each other, just kind of a collaborate and on a personal level, not necessarily work or anything like that. So yeah, that's kind of a very high level overview of kind of like how we run things from a meetings perspective.
And and kind of just another question just about Forecastr, what are kind of your goals the next few years? Are you going to continue being 100% remote? And how do you scale and kind of keep the camaraderie being a 100% remote company?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So I would say, like, on the 100% remote, the ship's kind of sailed at that point. At this point, I think. I mean, with 40 plus employees, and we're kind of all over the place. I think, we've kind of like made our bed as a remote company, and there's pros to that and there are cons to that, and we made it work, I think, really well. I think we've got an incredible culture. I think everybody jives super well together. And so we'll continue with the remote first approach. I think that's something that we are not going to strive from at this point. It's funny, you asked about like culture and building culture, in a remote first company, and like, how do you do that? Well, there's a couple of things there. One is that we prioritized a chief of staff hire who is really like, a lot of this focus is kind of like borderline HR, but it's like kind of just making sure everybody is like rowing in the same direction. Our teams are communicating well with each other, breaking down barriers, and just like making sure that like everybody is seen and heard and things like that. So like prioritizing a hire like that is something that I think is really important once you get of a certain size, is like really paying attention, having a dedicated person to like pay attention to the culture and making sure that we're all kind of like swimming in the same direction. So that's one thing. Brandon Moynihan, he's our chief of staff. He's incredible. So that's one. But then the other one is, we do this thing every year that we call the company offsite, where we physically get the entire company together. We do a little bit of work, but we also just have a lot of fun together, and we'll like try to do a lot of team building things. We actually just this past week got back from that. So I just got back from our company offsite this year. A couple of days ago, we had in Estes Park in Colorado. At there was like a YMCA resort there that we all got together. So like those are incredible. They're so important because it just reminds everybody that like their team is awesome. We all work super well together. And I think it just like really enhances the culture. I think that's important whenever you're a remote first company, is just making sure that like you do prioritize getting people together, because I really think that people further their connections there. And I would say, to answer your first question, what's kind of like the goal of the company, or like what are we striving towards? Our mission statement, just to say it plainly, is we want to be the default operating system for financial planning and analysis in the private markets. We want to be the Carta of financial models, the QuickBooks of financial models, right? The Gusto of financial models, kind of the default, right? Whenever you think of this, that this is who you use. Kind of like Kleenex, Kleenex is a brand name, but we all know what a Kleenex is, right? It's so that's kind of like the North Star, right? That's where we ultimately want to go.
By the way.
Yeah, I know, dude. I appreciate that. Well, actually, there was a really cool moment, speaking of that, where this is probably like 2 or 3 years ago, where I heard somebody say, here, let me check my Forecastr. They didn't say, let me check my financial model. They didn't say, like, let me log into Forecastr. It was like, let me check my Forecastr. And it was like a really cool moment where it's like, oh, wow, they're actually, that's what they're, calling that at this point. So that's kind of the mission. How are we getting there? There's a lot to dig into there, but we're really focused on the connective tissue of the venture market. So you've got, founders that talk to investors because they need money. You have investors that talk to their LPs because they're the ones that are actually supplying the money. You have people that are reporting information to the board. There's just flow of information that just happens in the venture ecosystem. And we have a lot of data running through our system. So that's one key strategy, is just like really zooming in on that connective tissue and just trying to get that flywheel to catch, where if you can own the data and you can facilitate conversations with the data that you have, you're just going to grow that much quicker, because now everybody wants to be a part of that conversation. So that's one of the big initiatives for us, is like really owning that connective tissue. We have strategies for how we're doing that, but I would say like the connective tissue layer, which is driven a lot by product and a lot by our team, kind of like in pursuit of the ultimate goal of being the default operating system for FP&A in the private markets. That's kind of like a good high level of where we're headed and where we want to go.
Amazing. I have two more quick questions. I know we're kind of coming up on time. The first question, Logan, if you can tell your 2019-year-old self first starting into Forecastr one piece of advice, what would it be?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say, if to quote a mentor of mine, when it comes to hiring or working with people, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. That would be probably the biggest piece of advice that I give is like, if you ever have kind of this feeling about somebody, or it's not like jiving perfectly, or you're interviewing somebody and you're like not 100% sure, but you're like, this person may be good enough. I don't know. It seems good. Let's give it a shot. And just don't hire them, and like, don't, you know what I mean? Like, really just be ruthless in kind of like who you bring onto the team, and kind of like who you work with, I would say is like probably the biggest piece of advice I give.
Got it. And then, do you have any final words of wisdom or advice to our listeners? They're all early stage founders, but any final words of wisdom or advice?
Yes, I do. And this is going to be very on brand, but it's always pay attention to cash flow. Always pay attention to how much cash you have in the bank, even if it feels like your cash flow is fine, even if it feels like you're not really burning a lot, or even if it feels like you don't need to raise. I feel like that's probably the most tactical and impactful advice that I could give, because that is the number one killer of startups. If you look at the stats and you see what is it that kills startups the most, it is just running out of cash. And that can be 90% of that can be avoided through just proper planning. Right. So, and I tell people, even if you're not a Forecastr customer, even if you don't want to buy Forecastr, even if you don't think it's important, just focus on cash and just don't let that go by the wayside. Because I've just seen I have worked hand in hand with too many founders that have had good companies that have died because they weren't paying attention, and they looked up one day and they noticed they had 2 months of runway left. And by that time, it's too late. Your company's already dead, because you're either going to have to fire everybody, or you're going to have to raise with your back up against the wall, which never goes well. So that's a kind of a tactical one, I'd say, is just pay attention to cash, make it a priority, cash flow management, make that a priority. And if you can do that, you are going to avoid the number one cause of startup failure.
Just also, sorry, one last question kind of came to mind. It's a quick one. How did you, startup, 97% of startups fail. It seems like you're a first-time founder. How did you train yourself to be a successful leader and CEO?
Yeah, man. Well, I appreciate that question. I would say, like, there is an element of I was in the right place and I had the right problem and the right expertise at the right time in the market. And so I don't want to pin the success of Forecastr all on just like me being this like incredible leader, or like this, amazing person that can just, go through anything. I think a lot of it was just that everything kind of fell in the right place at the right time. And then just being ruthless about our people. I mean, I keep coming back to that, but like, being in the right place at the right time tells you that you've got a great market and that you have a good opportunity and you just don't want to mess it up, right? But just being super ruthless about the people that we let into the business, and just making absolutely sure that the right people are here and they know what to do. That's the number one thing. For I think all of business, the number one thing is making sure the right people are in the room and they know what to do. And if you can do that, then your problems become significantly less severe, and you can pretty much tackle anything.
So, Logan, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on the Gildre Spotlight podcast.
Appreciate it. No, thank you so much for having me.